This room is here to define.
Okay, so let's read the question for the recording. So what we're doing in the non-conference is non-con here is how do we build A11Y, otherwise known as accessibility, into technical fundamentals at the primary level. Primary, Jan has informed us, means K through 5. And that's the beauty of the non-conference is it's really up to you in the room to help form this direction. I can ask leading questions. I can tell you that when I was in school 100 years ago in K5, we had to get really creative. So to do drawings that I could see, we used hem markers. If you don't know what that is, you put it on a piece of paper. It's a wheel. It creates braille-like things. So that's the kind of things we had to do back then. But that was in creating materials. So who wants to bring up the first point? I don't mind volunteering somebody.
I have nothing to do with teaching other than giving a few classes here and there, but.
Well, yeah, give us an idea to get us started. I'm not a teacher either.
So I'm like, do we want to talk about digital accessibility or just accessibility in general to expose children? And if we're talking about, I mean, I know I'm curious, when do kids start learning about programming or online or whatever? I mean, I think we need to expose them to different ways of interacting with the web because they must do that in K through 5.
So I was a first grade teacher. I was a teacher for 10 years. Then I was an instructional coach for a textbook company. So then I worked with teachers and now I work for the Texas Workforce Commission and I'm an e-learning developer. So I've kind of seen like.
You've seen all of it.
Yeah. And
Yep.
I've like been a teacher to lots of different people at stage groups and yeah. Wait, I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, we were talking about, so this kind of led me, who was the keynote speaker? Her, I'm blanking on her name from Salesforce. Yeah.
Crystal. Yeah.
Mhm. And she was talking about coding. And so she was sitting there because she was saying like, we need to, I know as a teacher, my first standard. So while she was talking, I like looked up the standards of technology that we have here in Texas and they're not on the website anymore. And then I looked at where I would go next as an educator. And it was like technology standard. And I talked about like being a legal citizen and like what that looks like and what that sounds like for first grade, converted, like all of grade levels. But accessibility was missing. It wasn't included in there. And so I can see how into schools and talking to educators, they would be like, I want more of that because resources weren't available. And again, I didn't do a deep dive. She was just talking about it. So I was like, I'll just look it up real quick.
Right.
But yeah, that was kind of what I was like, when she was talking, I was like, that seems to be a gap, like in what resources are available for teachers. And that's where I would start.
So if Randy's hasn't been in that grade level in 100 years, I'm 150. So, but I'm wondering, and Jan, you may be able to help us with this. When would assistive technology for users, grade school users of assistive technology, be noticeable by the rest of their constituents, the rest of the grade, and that kind of thing?
So let me make sure I understand your question. So if you have, let's just say, a blind kid in a first grade classroom or a wheelchair. Okay, I was going to use a blind kid so that you're teaching them Braille on a refreshable Braille display and they would have, I mean, anyway, so it could be a wheelchair. If they're in a wheelchair, immediately kids are going to notice their assistive technology and start hopefully, getting some exposure to what that means. And really they're pretty accepting of those things. And so we're not really, I think one of the things is we don't intentionally teach self-advocacy to students with disabilities or their parents, and so that to me, a skill that's somewhat lost. And so when I was teaching, we would talk with kids and say, this is kind of how you explain yourself and your needs, and have them practice and do those kinds of things. But there was no curriculum for that. So it just depends. I mean, assistive technology should be introduced as early as the
Yep.
student is capable of using it.
And in my case, it was Braille books and a Perkins Braille writer, so it was pretty dang obvious. But
Yeah.
but as you put, in those ages, I don't know a different way to put this, kids tend to be a lot more accepting of that kind of thing and curious about it. And it doesn't sound like that's changed, Jan, since.
Yeah, that's why I was asking the question, because some of it, when you're talking about fundamentals, is acceptance, understanding of what assistive technology or what disabilities are. And I wonder if that's where you start, is covering that. But I'm going to throw in something else because that's all. At the University of Texas at Austin, students with disabilities have to self-declare to an office before they'll help them. And so self-advocacy sounds like something you should teach early enough that they internalize it.
Yep.
And they know and feel comfortable with doing that later in life. On the other hand, last year we had a participant whose son was diagnosed with a disability later, and he was going to be going to college. And how do we make his transition to college easier, because we don't know anything about it? So once again, maybe it's something we need to teach everybody at a young age, so they're already feeling comfortable in their own skin. Maybe, if that makes sense. Anyway, like I said, it's all to get out.
I think self-advocacy is really important. That's something my Braille teacher taught me early.
Yeah.
And I think, I think an interesting question, I think we agree. How do we turn that into part of, how do you provide self-advocacy resources for teachers?
Well, I just learned about a resource out of Oregon called something about my AIM, advocating for my AIM educational materials.
Oh.
And it's kind of a curriculum, for lack of a better term, but kids fill out things like who's within their, circle of support, and, how do you define what you need given a, certain circumstance, and that sort of thing. But I think what I think is somewhat problematic in K-12 is that students with disabilities are often surrounded by a team.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that team removes barriers for them while they're in K-12.
Very true.
And oftentimes that team doesn't necessarily stop and think about, how is this student going to be able to do the same thing that we're asking them to do here, but without this team in place? When they get to higher education and they don't have a team of people removing barriers for them, how are they going to remove them on their own? So I think it needs to be part of the, training our teachers. A lot of times, and I don't know, were you a gen ed teacher? Okay. Did you have any instruction about kids with disabilities during your teacher prep program?
I honestly, I don't think so during my teacher prep program. I'm trying to think, that was a long time ago, but I don't think so. I was gonna kind of piggyback off that, because I was used to working with children with learning disabilities, typically, but they wouldn't get diagnosed until they were later, because you have to show, as a teacher, you have to prove that there is a loss significant enough for them to receive services. So kids would be in school with me, and I was like, I think that there might be some skill gaps here. So we start documenting, and it's this very big, long process, but eventually they would get the support they need in about third grade. But they've gone through several years of school where they haven't had that. And then also parents haven't had any education until then. So you're my kid is dyslexic, for example, parents receive no training or no education about it, and that kid's already in third grade. And so it's all these things, but I don't know how you would fix that, because I understand that they want the data. They want to show that there is a problem. and they want to take their time and to figure out exactly what's going on, but it also just feels like time is like slipping through your fingers, right? Because there's things you can do to support those kids in the process. I don't know.
So is part of the process enabling the parents, or is that outside of scope?
It's not done at all. But I think what you're saying, you're asking, should that be a part of it? Is that
Yeah.
your question? Yeah.
I think it
definitely-
should, but I'm trying to, it's a tough line to walk as a facilitator, so.
Yeah.
Should-
Okay. So I'm gonna throw out what would probably be seen as a very controversial opinion here, but I think asking kids to experience failure that young over and over and over again while you collect data is cruel.
It is.
And so this is where accessibility, of the educational materials could play a really, really big role in terms of helping to support different learning styles and needs and gaps and things like that early on so that the kids could learn, hey, I really need to have, text to speech and highlighting, or I like to listen more. That's how I learn best, as opposed to reading. And the problem is that we have a lot of political issues in our education system,
Yeah.
particularly in Texas, but we have a lot of people who don't think you're actually reading unless you're reading with your eyeballs.
Ugh.
And so listening to something is, in their opinion, not reading, which then throws this kid into more failure loops over and over where they don't feel like they belong in school. And I just feel like school should be a place where you belong. And the materials should be adaptable. And we should be teaching teachers that they should be, instead of saying this kid has, some learning gaps, right? Then yeah, identify that. How do we keep them included instead of excluding them and having them fail over and over again for 2 years before they get support? That's my controversial opinion.
I agree 100%. And doesn't the universal design for learning framework covers all that kind of stuff? I don't know how much that's used, but
Documentation from that would work also if it was accepted as documentation of X person, Billy wasn't able to do these things. When I gave him this alternative method, suddenly he's an A student from a D student. If that should be accepted as, there's my documentation.
And it's like, oh, sorry.
Go
Like,
ahead.
as a teacher, like that's what I would do, but also like I was a very good teacher. So I had not, but like I had the capability to like do that. Like I was like, oh, I know that that's what that kid needs. Like, but it wasn't like the set standard. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so like I knew that that's what I was providing and I could justify it when I was writing my data because I had the experience to do it. But I feel like if you have like a first year teacher who's just trying to figure out
Yeah.
kind of which way is up, they're not going to be able to do that as successfully.
Agreed. So I'm gonna ask you another question about your teacher prep program. 'Cause I'm way back. Class where it was just general and they talked about, I'm old enough that I had referred to. Okay. I didn't, when I was going through school, I never encountered a person with a disability because they weren't included.
Yeah.
And so that was terrible. And so I learned about this and I immediately went and said, this is what I want to do. I mean, that was the first time that I kind of got the spark and said, this is where I want to be. But when you were going through your teacher prep program, you talk about the overwhelming nature of your teacher and that teacher prep program. How could higher education integrate more awareness around this? And instead of just saying, here's a concept of, hey, there are people with disabilities in the world, how could they integrate something more to get a deeper understanding of how you accommodate that?
It's a very complex question. So for me, like, okay, so like teacher prep programs typically like don't prepare you fully to become a teacher because there's just like so much that you need to do. I went to college in Minnesota, so I did not go to college here in Texas. But they had what was like an interesting it was almost like a bridge program for first year teachers. You got your master's at the end of it, but you did not, I don't remember, there was like a funky like pay system, but then you got your master's at the end. So it's almost like you're working for free. But they had cohorts. And so then they would study things like that specifically. And then they would like go to lectures. It was like a continuation of your teacher ed program. And I wonder if like, maybe not to that extent, but like just having support for like first year teachers, like to talk about things like that. Cause it like, it's so important and it needs to be talked about. Maybe that would be a way to do it.
Could
Yeah.
you, for those of us who aren't
Yeah.
aren't past educators, what do we mean by teacher prep program?
So for the college, your first 4 years of bachelor's degree.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I
Yeah.
did not want to assume.
Yes.
So,
So I will say that teacher typically, or in my experience, it might be different than yours. The courses that you take in a teacher, like when you go to take your bachelor's, generally, like the first 2 years, you get to like decide kind of like you just need like a humanities credit and you can go take whatever.
right,
In my case, I couldn't do that because you need to take classes that will apply to your licensure. So like my art class was like, I had to take this specific art class. It was the history of art because I needed it for my license so that I could pass my like license examination.
right.
And so there's just not a lot of flexibility. And they're pretty like very regimented and rigid. Like this is what you need to learn. As like I think that's like where some of those like gaps and things are missing.
So is the proposal that maybe there needs to be a required class or something else kind of in those that at least introduces some of the concepts?
Yes,
Okay,
so. After I had my bachelor's, and I just had to fill in the gaps with the teaching specific classes. And they didn't really teach you anything. In fact, one of the teachers who had done research and was an expert writing books about it actually said a couple of times, this is what I have to tell you about this subject because that's what Texas says you have to say. And I can't tell you the real world. And I have a feeling, again, it's Texas. Sorry, Texas, for those who don't realize how backward we can be. That accessibility and disabilities and any of that is very specifically not considered to be part of the curriculum as opposed to, and the first time I, as a teacher during my student teaching was the first time I actually I knew what special education was, but it was the first time I saw how it was handled in that particular school. But I never got to see what was in the special education room itself. So I knew that kids were tagged and they had to go somewhere else to take tests. But even when that was what my thing in before student teaching, when just going into the school system, they never really told me why they were doing whatever they were doing in there. It was just like a black box. And unless you were the official teacher for there, they didn't tell anybody anything. So now we're still talking teachers being aware enough to actually teach fundamentals. So that may be the first one. How do we build accessibility into teaching fundamentals? Make sure the curriculum for the teachers that are the larval teachers know about what to consider and how to handle accessibility issues before they even get into a classroom. Because if you can't do that, even if you put it in the curriculum, are they going to teach it right? So what happens after that? How does it get into the curriculum? I know what? Okay, just give me a second.
no, this is meant to be a,
The WC has built some guides to teaching accessibility in the schools. How young they have it for, I don't remember, but I know they've been working on it for years. And I don't know, you can see what the W3 has
it's-
published to date, but I don't know more, exactly what that is anymore, because I haven't been part of that working group for a while. But so there's some stuff out there in the wild from accessibility groups, but whether anybody with a curriculum actually uses it is a different.
Okay, sorry.
Mhm.
Well, and that's like, so I worked for a curriculum company. This is weird. I haven't talked about teaching in a long time. It's kind of fun.
Well, good.
Yeah, hey. You get to hear all my special interests. So oftentimes I feel like accessibility is defined as differentiation in education. So differentiation means that like if you are teaching this one standard, you would modify it to meet the various levels that you have in your classroom. But while that is true and helpful, it also doesn't like talk about how to make things truly accessible. Like it doesn't tell you how to make that content accessible. Does that make sense? Like you're modifying the level for the need of that person, but not like about what about the thing that you're using to get that knowledge in their brain, what to do to make that accessible. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do we
And
still have
so,
anybody online?
Yeah, we have a viewer.
Okay.
yeah, or like, and there's just not a lot of training about it. And so I've just noticed that gap, especially like, because I did go, so as an instructional coach, I went to like a bunch of schools around Texas and I got to like talk with teachers, sit in their meetings and I would hear about their needs, like, what do you need? And that was always like a gap, like how, and then balancing that, like those resources, like I worked for the textbook. So like, I was like, here you go. But those weren't always the best resources that they could use. Does that make sense?
So wait, did you have textbooks that taught? I'm not trying to understand that statement. So there were textbooks and you could offer the textbooks, but what did the textbooks help with in this situation?
That was what I was there to help them use. I would not always say that that was like the most accessible form of the content.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, this is what you have because these are the resources that are available to you. And it's an also interesting kind of like side parallel conversation because we talk a lot about like equity and education. So yeah.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
but most,
Oh.
I guess, and I'm used to talking about it in terms of like economic status, like schools. There's kind of various levels to that.
So I'm gonna pause people in the room for a second. We do have an online viewer. So I want to see if the person online wants to share anything with us either in, sorry, I know this is a good discussion. Okay. Sorry, I hate to do that, but we have somebody, true. Go ahead. We have an online comment. Would you like to read it for us?
Disability history and accessibility should be in the student learning standards in grades K to 12. For example, social studies history standards could include disability history, and
Hmm.
it would make it its way into the curriculum.
I like
Middle school
that point.
computer science standards should include digital accessibility and assistive technology.
Hey, that's a great point. Can we keep the chat for later? Because I'm not going to be able to transcribe all that.
It comes with it.
Right. But that's because we didn't even consider disability history in the room. It's kind of like our keynote yesterday was getting at. But okay, feel free to bug us online or you'll keep looking for comments just so we don't but some fair points. So we've heard a few different things here so far. We've heard about self-advocacy, building in that ability, right? I don't know if we want to dig in more on that. There's accessibility of the curriculums. There was Jan's perfectly appropriate, highly controversial question. So are there any other kind of points we want to dig into, or do we want to kind of keep going where we are at this point? Like we just have some new topics on the board, like teaching disability history, things along those lines. Are there some other ways that we want to take this, or do we want to keep going as we are? Great point.
Anybody know how to get the accessibility history into the curriculum?
Disability history, I think.
Disability, accessibility.
Sorry, I didn't mean to shush you there overly. I'm protective of the virtual. I'm protective of the virtual folks.
Well, I mean, that's what Teach Access is trying to do at the college, at the higher level. So how do you bring that down?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know anything about you. Because it's something that I believe that we need to bring kids, start young. so
Yeah.
there's an awareness so that we're not teaching them in college.
Agreed. There's a career and technology education at the high school level. And they do stuff like the Microsoft Office Specialist certification that kids can get in high school and Adobe certifications. So building things, those certifications about accessibility and making that a requirement of the certification, I think would be excellent. But that would require
Yeah, that-
Microsoft and Adobe to do that. So
And that's in high school.
that's in high school.
Let me record that. So
I think also just having like media available. So I'm blanking on everyone's names today. There's a researcher, I believe her name is Simone. I can't remember her last name. But she talks about like how kids are much more likely to retain a picture book or a story if the person looks exactly like them. Like, so even if the person is like an animal, they still have trouble like relating to it. But if they
Mm.
see someone that looks like them in the story, they're I forget what the percentage is of them being able to like understand the like moral or the point of the story. And just having those like that media available, especially picture books, because they are so powerful, and like being able to integrate those. I know this current climate might make that challenging.
yeah, let's remove that barrier for this discussion.
Yeah.
I mean that's a fair thing to point out. I just don't want it to limit our imaginations in this conversation. Yeah.
But I do think that, and I'm like trying to think in my like Rolodex of all the books that I have. I don't know if I had, like now I'm like, did I have enough like representation? I tried to find ones like based on like ethnicity and like family structure, what that looks like for my students, but like I don't know if I had enough about disability. Yeah, now I'm gonna go home.
Yeah, are there, to your point, are there even picture books that include somebody in a wheelchair, for example? Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a good subject for research that comes out of this. Should we want to?
So that's kind of pushes us out. If you're gonna, picture books maybe are more home in the school.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's where the publishing need to come in, and kids have Chromebooks now. They should be able to crank out a personal.
Yeah.
But it's just technology. It's too bad.
Fair
that,
point. Yeah.
An iPad and a Chromebook. You need to work because you can't just change a name or change a face in a book.
Mhm.
You have to include things that make sense. Based on
Well, we had the folks from McGraw-Hill here, right? Maybe we should go talk to them. Not call them to the carpet, but it's a fair question. Does that kind of thing happen?
I used to work on EPUB stuff, like the Redium open source. I was trying to do and it's now Thorium, but
Yeah.
that was one of the things the publishing houses were very interested. And now you have the capability. You can even use AI to at least give you first pass of it.
Yeah, that's
The ability to do that. There we go. Let them develop their own books or modify their own books. Say, oh, we need a book for so and so.
but is that allowed? I'm not disagreeing with you. Is that?
And I don't.
Well, I don't either. I'm just the facilitator. I just stand up here and ask questions.
There is a board that approves all publishing materials.
I also have a bit of a gorilla personality, so I would just do the dang book anyway. But again, I'm the
Yeah, but
facilitator.
Yeah, let Randy write that book.
Yeah, especially drawing the pictures.
I will do that. But no, just to back up a couple points and then I'll continue facilitating. The only reason I ended up getting a lot of the services I did, then the schools got hip to it, was my parents fought for it. My parents, I had to go through 3 Braille teachers. So there was one that actually spent time teaching Braille. I can tell you lots of these stories and I'm not going to get into it here, but yeah, my parents fought for it. Once they had, as Jan put in, the proper team in place, then things started to roll. But without that parental component, and controversially, I'm not sure we can always count on that parental component to be there. So yeah, as I got educated way too early on the IEP system and all that sort of thing. But my parents, something I will add parenthetically is I was one of those kids who, because the textbook couldn't arrive in Braille because there was a delay at the prison who was Brailling the book. I'm not kidding on that part. I was like 3 weeks behind my French class in high school. So I think it's a good thing that electronic textbooks can be available because Braille could just be produced as fast as Braille could be produced. And sometimes it just didn't make it there for the beginning of the school year. I digress, as I'm good at. Where do we go next?
I just wanted to
Awesome.
follow up that, yeah, right now, again, there's a lot in, well, you know, kids are educated because the advocacy piece is so important. We're getting back to advocacy now.
It's huge.
And really the schools aren't necessarily financially motivated to teach parents how to advocate for themselves, right?
Yeah.
Because they may not want them to know what their rights are. They're legally required to tell them what their rights are, but they might give them a really difficult to read document about here's your
True.
rights. We're giving you a notification of your rights. And maybe the parent themselves can't even consume that for a number of reasons. But I did want to go back to situation. I just want to tell a story about my daughter who read a book when she was in 2nd grade. They read it together as a class called Out of My Mind, about a girl with cerebral palsy who had a photographic memory. I think it's became
wow.
a Disney movie.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And she was mostly nonverbal, but she was really, really smart. And so anyway, when they, was telling her, she was telling me about this book and how much she loved this book. And I happen to have 2 friends, Kate and Dave Chappell, who have cerebral palsy, and it, manifests itself differently for each one of them. And so they came and spoke to her class. And they brought all the 2nd graders in, even the ones that had not, read the book. And they got to ask Kate and Dave questions. And it was a really fascinating experience. And I think having those kinds of, real life experiences with people to just sort of take all the stigma away from it about the differences. And kids ask questions. One of the kids said to Dave, do you wish you didn't have a disability? And Dave said, no, I've got this cool wheelchair. And then he put his wheelchair up in the air and spun around and did all kinds of cool things. And the kids loved it. And they were like, oh, cool. And I talked to Crystal today a little bit, and she said that she's had the same experience with, when kids ask her about her eye patch.
Yeah.
She said, she explains, well, one of my eyes doesn't work really well. And they're like, okay, cool. And then they just move on. It just normalizes the differences,
I got drafted by my 3rd grade teacher. Once I got to 5th grade, she's like, you're coming back every year and you're doing a blindness thing. And to your point, Jan, I would like bring a beeping softball. I'd pull that out, toss it around a little bit, pull out all the cool technology. And I never thought at the time, because, well, my 3rd grade teacher said, thou shalt come back and do this. But it normalized all, and I handed out those Braille cards. I don't know if they still make them, that they have all the Braille. Yeah, I guess I got drafted into the normalization army, and it was cool because people don't mind talking about their disabilities, and people in general are pretty open at that age to that kind of. I want to pull on something you said, Jan, if I may, which I think is, so we're only limited by our imaginations here. is it then feasible to put the self-advocacy, I'll call it curriculum, and I'm not sure if that's what we're looking for. Maybe some self-advocacy sites or whatever you have them need to be broadcast that are outside of school curriculums. Is that fair? Are there such
Yeah.
things? Is that something we should think about?
Yeah, there is I'm gonna go find the link and try to somehow get logged into the Zoom. But basically the resource that I was talking about that I just learned about in the last couple of months is available on the Open Educational, the OER Commons website, which is an open educational resource site, which, you know, has its issues, but they're trying. And I think that's another way to potentially share some, I mean, like Yuta, who was here doing the flipped classroom, has some things on the OER Commons site about AI. And so there's some good things on there. And I think there's a way to potentially integrate some of that into the existing curriculum and maybe pull resources from there.
No, what I was referring to is if we can't count on the schools to do it, which is I think what you said, should we focus on other ways of getting that information to the parents? I mean, I agree with you about the curriculum. I'm just pulling on the thread that you mentioned about, you know,
Yeah.
what if we can't count on the schools to necessarily do that?
Yeah, I know. So, like, I've noticed, I don't know if this is a Texas thing or just like where, like, that I have been out of elementary school for a long time, but counselors are much more present in schools. And I don't know if that was just my district where I was, but
That's
counselors
true.
are like a lot more involved. And so it was really cool because they would pull groups for like whatever their need is. Like, so self-advocacy was one of them, but they would pull for kids that might need it for their disability, but then they would also pull it for kids who just are like like they just need help like with the words or to be a part of that same level peer group. And they would spend like a quarter, I forget how often they would do it. But it was really cool because then you got to see like the counselor had a curriculum for them. They had tools, like then the counselor would come and tell us like these are the tools. Then the counselor calls home and tells them the tools, like this is the tool we learned, or like this is the like I don't know, the steps, or like I don't know, like, or one of them was how to say it, like not just self-advocacy, but that fell under that umbrella. Like one of them was like how to say no respectfully. And then they were like, here are the steps to say no respectfully. And then so the counselor would give me, and they're like, here's their little desk aid. It's going to be on their desk, tape it down. And I'm like, cool. Then I would wear it around my neck too, so I could follow the steps and make sure that I was honoring their system. Then the counselor would call home and the parent would also get that handout and also know those same steps. But I do think that it was like very cool to see as an adult, like those things that were missing when I was a kid. So
Yeah.
it might not be perfect, but I do feel like I hope we're trending. I want to be hopeful. We are trending in like a correct direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Any comments, any other comments from the online folks, if they're still with us? Okay. We still know you're out there. We hope you're still with us. Thank you for your contributions. So I think if I could restate that, and I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. Haley, sorry. Haley, I think what you just stated is it could be made part of counseling practices, counseling curriculum. Is that the right?
Yeah, counseling. And it was cool too, because counseling, for some reason that just like was not present in my like childhood at all. I don't know. And it was new for me. I taught for a couple years. I'm not originally from here. I taught for a couple years in Chicago too. And that was not a part of the curriculum either, but it is here in Texas. And it's cool because again, they pull those tiny groups. So then, or if kids need help with social skills, they'll go and teach them about like what, like adequate eye contact, and they'll like spend however long doing that. like however many counseling cycles, but it's not just, it's like a mixed group. It's not, so sometimes it's like kids that don't need help with eye contact or don't need help with self-advocacy, so that those kids can learn from the other kids, like what that looks like in like a much more relaxed setting, which I think is cool. And then also as a class, we would all go to counseling. So like once a month, we would go to counseling as a class. We would make sure we're doing our like, it always starts with like a restorative circle. So you do something like some type of team building, and then we learn a skill that we then apply in our class. So like how to be like manners, or like if you're on the playground, how do you interact with each other? Like what would make you feel good, or like what, I don't, it just was like very cool to see. And I feel like it made a huge difference. Like kids were much more, they really understood the concepts.
That's awesome. A point I was going to make earlier.
Yeah.
Self-advocacy should be about everybody,
Yeah.
because then it kind of makes it not about, well, Randy needs to take his self-advocacy class. That's sort of, I've had some experience with stuff like this, if you can't tell.
Yeah.
So, but okay, awesome. Awesome, thank you. What's next? Do we need a little bit of a break? How are folks feeling?
I'm gonna be very transparent here. I do have something to add. I actually walked into the wrong class. But with that said, I have a son who is on the spectrum. He has sensory processing disorder. So a lot of things that y'all were talking about, I can empathize and actually get through some of it. And that's the thing. And let me put it this way, in regards to my son, my daughter, went to a private school. And so the grandparents were helping. My son did it because the reason being is he actually had better resources in the public school. He was learning to read before she did. And the thing is, where I live in the Austin area. They have a very good program. It doesn't mean that there weren't deficiencies, but at the same time, we were very fortunate. One of my mom's cousins, one of my wife's cousins, and in their school district, she saw that she would be in a meeting and the counselors would be telling the parents, well, your child is in need of assistance. We've done everything we can do. And she would be I
Ouch.
actually see that this child needs resources.
Yeah.
And still needs assistance. We didn't really experience that except for one time. But once our son was actually going to school for several hours a day before he was admitted into kindergarten.
Yeah.
With the year before kindergarten, the teacher told my wife and I that, you know what, I've done everything I can for your son. He doesn't need assistance anymore. We fought it. We said we respectfully disagree. We'd like to keep him in school because he's getting social. So we had a second meeting. The second meeting had the counselor, the teacher, and some other person. I don't remember who. And we were told, we did everything we can for your son. Again, we respectfully disagree. The third meeting, we were in a conference and the table was full of people. And it was only a few weeks into school, so we agreed, you know what? We'll go ahead and we'll put them out because at least from my perspective, are they going to even be helping him while he's here? It's only a few weeks left, so we took him out and we enrolled him into daycare. What is it for a month? That way he will get some socialization before we started school. That was what we started at. Wonderful program. He got everything he needed. And the thing is, when he got academics, he was verbally delayed. I didn't realize how smart he was. I mean, he would score 98% on the STAR test and 96 on the STAR test, and he was verbally in language and he was verbally delayed. Even now, our problem is getting him to do work. For the ops side, he got kicked out because he wasn't going to the meetings and
Yeah.
you want to be in. And one of his superpowers is that he's very honest. He's like, I don't care about accolades. Really right. And now he's at a point where he doesn't really need any assistance anymore, but everything we all are discussing. I guess I came to the wrong house, but I find it fascinating. And that's why I'm being here.
Oh, we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
And thanks for speaking up. Well, thanks for getting prompted and speaking up with some of us more mouthy folks here. That's
You know,
it.
Question, from a parent's perspective, and how do you think the teachers should be prepared to be able to better serve families and their children have these?
To be honest, that's a really good question. We are fortunate that most of his teachers are really good, but that's the thing, the teachers have to be advocates. That particular
Mhm.
teacher, we heard from a friend who was a teaching assistant that she didn't actually have the best reputation when it came to assisting kids. That would be the number one thing, because once he got into the other classes, he had everything he needed. So making sure that the teacher is an advocate. And the other thing I would say is, and I didn't mention the start, testing to another school. And they said, no, he doesn't need assistance. Well, the thing is that we already had met with neurologists, we had documentation. And saying that, yes, he's on the spectrum, he needs assistance. Even with that, they wouldn't assist.
Mm.
So we actually had to go ahead, and we're fortunate, for the insurance, we had to put him into private therapy.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And into therapy before he actually started going into the classes. So the other thing is make sure the teacher's an advocate, and also, you know, we need to be our children's advocates. Or
Yep.
making sure that advocate on behalf of our children. Because, like I said, I mean, this was taking with the school counselor and saying, no, you know,
Mhm.
sorry.
Yeah.
your child is gonna fine. And of course, it's speculative. But most likely it has to do with resources and finances.
Yeah.
And that's why we're turning children away when there might be other children that probably need additional assistance. So basically, they're taking and choosing who goes into the program. Oh, well, that was after.
Tactic of you meet, you know, kind of in a small room with just you and the teacher and maybe the counselor, and then it's you, the teacher, the counselor, the administrator. And then you go to a conference room where you're surrounded by these district professionals. How did that make you feel as a parent?
Like we were fighting an uphill battle. That's what it felt like. And that's why my wife was, and we discussed it afterwards. She's like, we should have kept fighting. I'm like, I don't even know if he was going to get the assistance afterwards. Because obviously she already had her army behind her. You know, how do we know that she wasn't just going to stick him in a corner or who knows what? And don't
Right.
get me wrong, I'm not saying that advocate, but it was
Yeah.
obvious that she wasn't going to be his advocate.
Was feel like he belonged because she was clearly not doing that. And it's, anyway, it's a very common experience, I think, for families. And when your child, I mean, you had this report from a neurologist and you had all the documentation and everything, and that's another huge disservice that happens right now in education for kids who are, you know, have
Mm.
they start to take standardized tests or certification tests when they, you know, graduate or whatever, and they want to take a certification test for them. They have to prove you're still blind. Okay, and that's not like it's cheap, but it's not $3,500. Right now, some of the certification houses have an arbitrary 5-year sort of timestamp on your certification. So if you had a because neurological, you have to go spend $3,500 to reassess and get that. That to me is a huge civil rights violation, but that's not the topic we're here to discuss. So
You were saying we were fortunate because we were in a good school district. What about, children that live in school districts where they're financially strapped, where resources aren't as readily available? So that's another thing. So we were fortunate in that. And then just taking him to therapy, out of pocket was $100. That's the insurance. Imagine families that don't have those resources. So
That's what really terrifies me is
huge.
my parents were fortunate enough to have decent resources or be able to find them, right? But
Yeah.
to your point, what happens in that case?
If you
Without-
if you want to cry and be depressed, watch the movie Waiting for Superman. Have you ever seen that? It's a documentary I did basically to your point about kids who are in bad school districts, and not just kids with disabilities, just kids who are in bad school districts, and the inequity of education in general, and this lottery system, to try to get them into a better school. The parents, so you get to learn about the hopes and the dreams of these kids, and they have several different families, and they kind of talk to them about what they're hoping for and why, and they talk about the school they'll have to go to if they don't get into this school they're trying to. And then at the end, you've become attached to all these kids, and some of them don't get their hopes and their dreams. And it is
Yeah.
really devastating, but it was a very powerful movie or documentary because it shows the inequity. And if we just invested in education as a country and made this a priority like they do in Finland,
Yeah.
we wouldn't, it cost, I did a grant application, and, in Texas, we have discount on our cost of how much it costs to maintain. So, I did a emotional and behavioral disorders, and how many of them end up statistically in prison, and how much it costs to maintain them in prison in 6 years. And so just with the school time, it's going to cost the kids that were on the track to prison. We had taken again, Waiting for Superman, watch it.
I'll put it on the list.
That made me think back to my teaching. I haven't talked about teaching this much in so long. But especially those services like speech and physical therapy, occupational therapy, they are like very, very hard like to get. And I did teach in a district where it was like 97% like free and reduced lunch. And then on top of that, we also had a 30% mobility rate. So that means 30% of our students had housing that was unpredictable. They might have had a structure over their head, but it would be something inconsistent. Okay. So often students would only be there for like a snapshot in time, right? Which makes it like very, very hard when you're trying to get services and also educate parents, because they're like, they don't have time for me. Like they want to, but they're like, I just don't. They like are like, I need you. And I'm like, I'm going to do the best I can. But those services are very expensive too, to pay for. And that's something I noticed. And like my husband is a physical therapist. So I was like, I know for a fact, it made me think of, I had a student and they wouldn't give him physical therapy. He had autism, and he had physical therapy, but it was like once every 2 weeks for 8 weeks, which is not enough when he was unable to do the things that he needed to do. He just needed, so I knew my husband school had like they had a child development class, and I was like, can he be one of your people that you like work on? But I was like, but then we come back to that like equity thing. Like not every classroom has a me in it, where I'm gonna like call up other people and I'm gonna look up all those resources. And it's so challenging, and like it's so interesting to hear from a parent's perspective, because I was like, I want to know what they thought in that moment when they were like listening to me being like, no, that's not. They probably were like, this lady is crazy. But it was just, yeah. So thank you for sharing.
Okay, where do we, anything from online? No, all right. Where do we want to go next? We've covered a huge amount of territory, which I'm very grateful for.
Amy's ice cream. No, where do we
What-
want to go?
What's Jenny's? Oh, I didn't know there was a Jenny's ice cream.
Okay, where's Lick ice cream?
Well,
And
that's
for
an
those online who can't hear these people, we're discussing ice cream places in Austin.
No, that's fine. That's fine. No, that's cool. I'm not sure. Oh, go ahead. I've got no issues with
We
finishing.
have another thing we need to talk about. Okay, so yeah, so if talking about building
Can somebody
accessibility,
get the door?
I'm gonna
I'm
get the
sorry,
door,
it's,
hang on.
Yeah. I've noticed in my older age, I don't do as well with like loud noise filtering into classrooms. Yeah.
So I was gonna say, in terms of, teaching accessibility fundamentals, the software we're using to teach kids how to. That's
Yeah.
there should be some advocacy with companies, making them aware and trying to be somehow motivated to be inclusive.
I used to volunteer for Girls Who Code or different organizations, and none of that software even considered
No.
accessibility. And that's a perfect time to introduce it to people. Of course, you have to have the volunteers, because it's all volunteer, that would know to tell them, look, if you only could use the keyboard, unless they had a child or someone in the room. But and that was like when we used to do like IBM used to take, engineers would go, it was
Yeah.
kind of like a take your kid to work, but it was take an engineer to go in the classroom and
Yeah, I did a
Right,
few.
yeah.
I did a few of those. Yep.
helps to bring up, usually you did some activity, like, building a bridge with
Yeah.
spaghetti or whatever, but I would always go in and I would start a conversation about, do you know how people that are blind use the computer? And I actually found as time went on, more kids would say, oh, they use the screen reader. And I was like, they knew what it was, and sometimes I'd even go in and demo it. But that just, you made me think of that, none of those tools that you're given to go work with students as a volunteer even are accessible.
When it's demotivating, I got asked to join some like computer explorers group in high school. And I rolled in and they did put a screen reader on the system, but it was all GUI, which at the time was a mess. I quit after it was like 3 hours a night, once a week during the week. So if I wanted to sit and do nothing for 3 hours, I could easily do that at home, but it's demotivating. It's one of the
So
people being
one
in
of the
that.
things that was developed in multiple different places, but I was at AT&T in our group, and one of my coworkers created an empathy lab, which
Yeah.
was used to different cities for employees
Mhm.
who were coders or whatever, and included screen readers and voice recognition and spoons that had the gyro thing and a bunch of other things in it. And DQ also did one. In fact, they collaborated at one point. Now that's for adults, but everything
Hmm.
they did could probably be done taken to a classroom,
I think so.
maybe not
Yeah.
including some of the verbal reading kind of thing, because I don't know where reading levels are. But if we're talking about accessibility fundamentals, if there could be like another day like the Scholastic Book Day, but for
Excellent idea. Let's just.
It is.
I was just thinking that not all school districts, right? You've got assistive teachers of the visually impaired, blind and visually impaired. And classrooms on, I don't know, inclusivity day or whatever we want to call it. And GAD, do demos of this stuff. I mean, I've taken my, my Braille writer, and Braille people's names, and, like when I teach Sunday school or something like that, taught kids how to do sighted guide with each other and give them some awareness, saying, do you know what's on this sign right here? This is Braille, that says, and stuff like that, where resources, if they just promoted it, gave them an opportunity to have these days where in classrooms helping.
So who do we know on school boards? I'm not trying to make light of what you're saying. I think it's an awesome idea. And I just put the empathy, well, it's all part of the empathy lab piece, but I put that in the notes. I remember Scholastic Book Days. Eesh.
Where the classes come into the library and the specialists are there and they have stations.
So especially like in the district that I taught, like I said, a lot of kids never leave, right? They don't get to see. We would come for a field trip and they Austin and they thought we were in New York because they had never seen the buildings that
Yeah.
So like, it's many opportunities to bring like the community into schools and like a diverse community into schools. It's just so powerful. I think I've seen like a lot of my friends are still teachers. It's been a lot of push for career day more often. Like I feel like for a while it was like removed because they were like, we got to do testing, and like now people are doing it again because they saw that like kids need to see. We might not always be able to take them other places to see other people, but we can bring other people to them, which is better than nothing. And so I think that would be like a very successful idea because it would run kind of the same. Yeah. Like either like one, everyone take turns, or like everyone could stop in a room, and yeah, that'd be cool.
I'm just thinking of how some of the conferences have you go and you get your little stamps. to
Yeah.
get People to go to the different booths.
Yeah.
You get your stamp, and if you get all the stamps, you get a prize or something. Adults like it, so kids certainly like it. How do Knowbility do this?
I want y'all's ideas about how could Knowbility help promote this in schools?
Well, I know that the major stations, including laptops and tablets, cost less than $1,000 or it did in the dollars of, 5 years ago or 8 years ago. So it's not a big expense. We could probably get enough donations here to create one. The problem is there's going to need to be a community person at Knowbility who reaches out to the schools or to the resource centers or wherever, which you might know where to contact. But that's probably it. We're going to,
Well,
how to get Knowbility to do it is to get enough either volunteers or employees to organize it. And then communications with the schools and getting the schools buy-in, right?
well, VR does school outreach, so that might be a place to start. Does
Right.
VR no sense? Because that's one of my wife's jobs. So in terms of school outreach, that would be hey, VR folks, who do you talk to in school outreach? That could be maybe a place for Knowbility to start in terms of the outreach pieces.
And Knowbility knows some of the people who built the empathy labs I know of, because they've worked
Yeah.
worked with Knowbility before.
There are some controversy about empathy. There's controversy. You have to be very careful how you do it because, yeah, so you don't, because a lot of people were like, oh, we don't want people to feel sorry for us. And then at some point when it first started, there was some of that feeling. I think people are more conscious how they do these empathy labs.
Yeah, that can be a slippery slope. I agree.
Yeah, so there was a student in AISD several years ago who had Archer's Challenge, and he was at a high school that didn't have automatic doors on it, and he was a kid in a wheelchair, and he had somebody videotaping him on a day where it was raining and he was locked out of the school and couldn't get into the door because the doors were not automatic. So he got somebody to donate some wheelchairs for a day, and then people, tried to spend the day in a wheelchair at school, and then they raised money that way. They
That's
got
neat.
sponsors or whatever. And so it was a student-led idea, to sort of raise awareness. And so maybe you do something like that, where you bring the kids in and say, how would you do it?
Awareness lab has also been used as a term instead of empathy lab. So it's more about the equipment is going to be the equipment, right? It's the wording and presentation. You're right, but yeah.
Anyway, he raised enough money to get all the doors installed at his high school. And then our illustrious governor came out. And
Who's
they
in a
did like
wheelchair?
a little, presentation. They sat there and talked to each other. Yes. But what was neat about it was his idea. He originated it. He told his story, and then he made it into something positive.
So is it a question of, sorry, I want to acknowledge that. You're right. It is absolutely cool. Is it a question of having Knowbility then kind of bring the talent challenge to the kids, for lack of a better term?
Well, that's what I was wondering. I was wondering
Yeah.
if we could have, students get to come to Access U and come up with these ideas, and
Yeah,
I
why
don't know.
not? Crowdsource it. Crowdsource it, right? That's, yeah.
What age do you target? High school?
We target grade school. Not for the
For access you, I mean, coming to access. Middle school? And assign them someone?
So I did a student panel one year so Knowbility had attempted to have sort of a K-12 track, but they did it in the summer because May is really hard for teachers here because they're closing out school.
Yeah.
But the student panel was interesting, as I did have like a middle school ability, and then college. So I tried those ages. I didn't have anybody. But the purpose of the panel was for them to talk about the challenges that they had with getting the services that they needed in school.
Mm.
Telling some stories where they had help and what success looked like, and where they didn't get what they needed. And so that was a really really powerful panel, just because it gave the kids a voice, and they got to say, we practiced in advance. They wrote, and we had, so they felt very confident. We're sitting in front of people talking about it. But maybe something like that, where we start small,
Yeah.
and we get an age range of kids, because you'd have to have the parents here if they're primary school. You'd have to. So again, you're not necessarily getting representation of every kind of kid there, because if you have a parent who's willing to bring their kid here, then that parent's a good advocate already. Necessarily getting the kids who may have that aren't well vocalized because they parents.
Designated.
Good idea.
She stole my thought,
I
but yeah,
like that.
great minds think alike.
Yeah. Yeah. So like having, like, explain what you're thinking.
I'm thinking you do that kind of a panel, but you record it. And then you have some additional question, like a resource. I mean, the problem is getting it to the teachers, but it's something you could advertise. Yeah, and you could, then you can make sure it's fully captioned. Here's some further discussion topics. How could we make it better? Or maybe you do, I don't know. That to me, it's like the whole world is YouTube and everything else. I hate that the whole world is videos. I'd rather read.
I hear you.
To tag on to that, I remember when teaching, there were the teacher's guides and further subjects to bring up later. So you could have that video, but if you have those other resources for the teachers to follow up, would be even better there. But that's another resource. What to do in schools.
So we've got the video of the panel idea, and then what was the other Access U idea? Right. I think they're both, I think they're both valuable.
I think bringing kids in and maybe doing a flipped classroom with them and
There you go.
having them come in and try to solve the problem of, how would you
Yeah.
maybe do an Archer's challenge?
This whole thing. Design challenge, like real world challenge. Where you really like. I think it
I would sign up for that in a heartbeat.
Then you bring the kids in, whether they have disability or not. Okay, but how, these people have been doing that. How would you just gone to the conference. This is your thing, you have to make suggestions.
Yeah.
Solve some of the problems they were talking about. What would you do?
And then publicize that,
talk about it like just having kids like submit their designs and then whatever they did is what I thought. Right? Like then they can come and talk about like why they did it. I also think that would hit a lot of standards. So teachers would like be able to integrate it really easily. You know what I'm saying? Like, because it hits a lot of science and math standards too. Cause it's like all ties in and you could like kick it off the unit with like doing like kind of a lab like that where they're exploring things that are already in place. They're given like a real world problem and then they can go and solve it. I think that'd be super cool.
I think it
So-
would have to be something like the Archer's Challenge thing that
Yeah.
Jan mentioned, right?
Well,
Yeah.
so there are academies in schools for, computer science. So I know you'd have to kind of do some research about where they are in the local area. But I'm wondering if we could reach out to them and say, hey, here's this, Archer's Challenge kind of thing. And the challenge is, how do you raise awareness about different kinds of disabilities and make sure that people understand how to, include them in everything that they're doing, and see if the kids could come up with games that they could play or, all kinds of whatever, and challenge those kids in those computer science academies to sort of do not necessarily air for high school, but some kind of actual, social justice kind of activity.
Yeah. Why do you have to limit to the computer science kids though? I mean, you could, based on the process that you described, you could also
Well, you
make
don't,
it a process kind of.
I don't think you necessarily have to limit it. I was just thinking that in the context of digital accessibility,
Right.
that might be sort of a way to start the introduction in those academies as a challenge for them. It's some sort of project that they have to complete, and then it trickles down into the younger age groups, and they maybe their own advocacy curriculum from that.
It's like a smaller group of people, so you can kind of like do the process a little bit easier that way instead of just like everybody. It's a little bit more narrowed down, right?
I have a story. So
When we got our $2.2 million grant with no grant to build the assistive technology curriculum, the vendor that ended up getting bid was not a very scrupulous vendor. And a friend of mine was teaching in the academy at LBJ High School for all the people that he wanted to be. And these kids learned come to our classes and they learned about accessibility, and then we had trouble with our vendor telling us something couldn't be done. These kids schooled, I mean, big time schooled them in the code part of it and said, that is
Yeah.
not true. And here's how you do. And they're like, 16, and they just totally schooled them, which is why I think it'd be kind of cool to, because
Yeah, yeah. No,
yeah.
I wasn't disagreeing with you. I was just facilitating and ask questions. So yeah, asking questions. So. Air for high school sounds like it'd be hard to scale, but yeah, I like the other. Except I like the idea of air for high schools, but that's outside the scope of this. That's outside the scope of this. That's a parking lot item.
In regards at the high school level, I mean, going ahead and gathering participation. You all reminded me of a class I took the other day, selfish accessibility.
Oh,
You know,
yeah?
regardless of the motivation and in regards to getting kids to participate, this is something that we could go ahead and put in their college application.
Oh, yeah, this would be a huge differentiator. Even when I was evaluating intern resumes for college, if you had something like that on there, that would have been a differentiator.